G'day guys, and welcome to the first ever episode of Caleb's Conversation Podcast. On this podcast, I'm going to encourage healthy, long-form conversation and debate, and have conversations with interesting people who have interesting things to say. Now, some of you may be wondering what this podcast will focus on. This podcast will focus on movies, shows, sport, or the latest controversial topic that is circulating in the news cycle. This podcast is being hosted in Australia, and I'm happy to introduce, for the very first time, someone I've got to know quite well over the last couple of years of my life, Dr. Dean Chircop.
Thanks, Caleb.
So I'll say, what is the position that you have at the film school, and what is your day-to-day jobs and stuff and responsibilities?
Okay, so my position as the program director of the Bachelor of Film and Screen Media Production degree essentially requires me to be the custodian of the whole program. And that means anything from day-to-day activities, teaching students, which I love to do, through to managing the hiccups of international travel for international students here at the moment, looking at the program and making sure that it's relevant and up to date and speaks to the industry as broadly as it possibly can, and I guess also being an ambassador for the film school to ensure that our profile within both industry and also for those students wishing to study with us is visible.
Okay. But I'll say, obviously, working at a film school, one of the things that you'd be most passionate about is filmmaking itself. So what was the thing that really got you inspired in filmmaking, and what was the thing that kind of drew you towards filmmaking as a lifestyle and a career?
That's a complicated and long, extrapolated answer I would have to provide for that. But look, the short form is I didn't initially gravitate towards filmmaking. I didn't come from a school that had filmmaking practice. It was essentially a maths science school. I excelled in areas, in sort of graphic drawing, and initially I was enrolled at the University of Queensland to was studying architecture at the time. If you ask me what it was that spoke to, how movies spoke to me and why I decided to change, I don't have a definitive answer on that. I do think that we've often spoken, or we teach you guys, that the best stories are the ones that tap into primal emotions. So by primal emotions, it means it's the ones that we all, can have from time to time, for lack of a better term. So those, your fear, your love, and those sorts of ideas. And for me, I in a certain way, I'm going to be open enough to say I think it was fear. I had a lot of people who loved good old horror movies, and they just didn't work for me because it played on my active imagination. And I think in a certain way, that's what attracted it to me as well. But also I would say that people often say, well, the correlation between architecture and filmmaking is pretty distant. But what I would say is they're both project-based industries. And so for me, I think one of the points of being gravitating towards film was because it's very much project-based, and I like that. I like moving from project to project. And one of the things that has endeared me to this industry is the breadth of opportunity of people you can meet, different industries that you can be involved with, and the diversity of the stories that they want to tell. So, yeah, it wasn't a natural fit to begin with, but once I'd found myself studying it, I found that it was a really good fit and spoke to what I was passionate about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like the film industry is definitely like that because it has so many different avenues that kind of require so many different professions and people who think different ways to come together in search of one project and one sort of trajectory, which I think is really interesting. And I think, that idea of like bringing people who have different walks of life to tell one story, I think, is definitely interesting. Is there a certain movies or project that you kind of watched as you were growing up that you kind of spoke to you? Like, do you have like a favorite movie or anything like that?
Yeah, no, not a favorite movie for saying, hands down, that's the film for me as a natural fit. I like films for different reasons, and I'm not trying to dodge the question here. It's just that's the honest truth, and I'd also say at different points in time, different movies have spoken to me because of where I was at in my life or my age. So it could be anything from the initially falling in love with, the early Coen Brothers films just for their witty dialogue and their brilliance of coming up with these really abstract narratives, through to sitting in a cinema back in the day and watching Pulp Fiction with an audience and watching the way that they reacted.
Wow, I can imagine that'd be pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah. So for all sorts of different reasons, I enjoy movies, and then others just speak to you for a private reason. So yeah, again, it's for a variety of reasons, and I couldn't single out any one individual film.
Yeah, it's hard. I feel like when people ask you, like, do you have like a favorite movie or whatever, it's because there's so many types of movies out there, and because there's so many of them, I feel like it is hard to kind of pinpoint one movie. I remember for the longest time that when people asked me that question of do you have a favorite movie, I used to say The Dark Knight was my favorite movie. Just I thought it was so well done by Christopher Nolan. I thought Heath Ledger as the Joker is, iconic. But yeah, now I've been like, especially since my time at film school, I've been opened up to so many other types of movies, and I feel like now, like, that sort of idea of picking one movie that you definitively say that's your favorite, I can always watch that and enjoy it. I can't say that definitively just because there's so many great movies out there. And, right. Not just from Hollywood, just like even like overseas, and like, because like even Parasite, which was a Korean film, I believe.
It is.
Yeah, that was an amazing movie. It even won Best Picture in the Oscars last year. So like, I feel like there's such a breadth of talent, like internationally. So yeah, when someone asks you what's your favorite movie, I understand. Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, especially nowadays because there's so many movies.
And also, just quickly on that, because of the breadth of cinema as well. I mean, you can sit there and reflect on sort of the, let's call it the tentpole Hollywood productions with the large budgets, but at the same time, there's a lot of great indie cinema kicking about. And look, the one thing I don't want to be dismissive of, which I'd like to champion, is the great Australian cinema out there at the moment that just doesn't seem to be capturing the audience that it deserves.
Yeah, it's strange how, Australian cinema, I feel like there's a stigma around it. Like, almost like anytime anyone hears about an Australian project, there's almost like it's already not going to be good. Just because I don't know why, but there just seems to be a stigma around Australian cinema, and it just doesn't seem that it has that prestige like a lot of the Hollywood or stuff even from like the UK and stuff has. Why do you think that is, though?
Well, no, my question to you on that, Caleb, is that what is it that you've said you think there is a stigma to it? Like, is that something within your generation?
I think so, yeah. I'll say even just conversations with people that are my age or even younger than myself. Anytime, like you mentioned, Australian film, for the most part, it's like, what is an Australian film? Like, they can't really like list any because there's not really any tent poles that you can really think of.
We're not in the tentpole market because we just don't have the budgets.
We're a lot more niche
that.
than that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I would be saying is that I've always done the comparative analysis against Australian music, which seems to thrive locally, and so I don't know why, with respect to that creative practice arena of music and film, that film has had this stigma attached to it. Now, I do know that making a film versus making an album, there's a significant budgetary difference, and equally the stakes with respect and also how to release it. And that's not me then judging one against the other, but I have noticed probably for about the last 20 plus years that Australian music doesn't have the same stigma attached to it that you just identified. I'm unsure. How can I say it? I've never been able to drill down on research, through, I guess, just a canvassing of audience. I think for someone like yourself who is aware of Australian cinema, the idea of the stigma is something that's probably come about with. How can I best describe this? It's come about with an awareness that the cinema is there and the certain films are probably not speaking to you the way that other cinemas do. But that aside, the general public, which is the main audience for cinema,
absolutely,
you can't expect just film enthusiasts or cinephiles to be the audience for a film. So that's the catchment I would put you in. The general public just don't know the films are there, and that's the hard part. So,
I agree. I think marketing is a huge thing. That's the big thing that I feel like Australian cinema is also competing with, is a lot of the Hollywood stuff, which has these multi-million-dollar productions and stuff, but then they also have multi-hundred-million-dollar marketing campaigns as well, where you have bus ads, commercials on YouTube and various social media things. That's what they have to compete with. So, of course, everyone's going to know what the latest I don't know, Marvel movie is, or the latest, King Kong movie or whatever, because they get so many ads for it and they know about it because it's everywhere in sort of the zeitgeist. Whereas an Australian movie, I feel like it's very much difficult. It's so much more difficult for it to get out there and for people to be aware of it because they don't have the same amount of money pumped into these marketing campaigns. So yeah, I think it's a hard thing that they have to deal with. But again, when you're dealing with such a smaller audience and a niche audience, I feel like, it is harder to kind of reach out and get a large, not only national, but international audience as well.
Yeah, look, there's a great book by a woman by the name of Linda Obst called Sleepless in Hollywood, An Introduction to the New Abnormal. And it's a wonderful read for, I'm not here spruiking it, by the way. It's just a book that if you love, I love reading books about how films are made and the process and the different contexts, both on a business and a cultural at any point in time, both on a business level and a cultural level, that then informs the type of films that are being made. And if you read that book, she has two great topics that she touches on. The first one that you addressed, which is marketing, and her belief now is that studio heads are no longer the ones that are that give the green light to a film. Normally, when a big budget film from one of the studios is going to be released, they normally wheel in, or in her account, they wheel in the head of marketing first. And if the head of marketing doesn't think that they can market the film, then the studio head is is less inclined to green light the film. So that then says to you that it's actually marketing that has the power, not the studio head just wanting to tell the great film like probably the model was once in the past. And then to also touch on the idea of what you were saying with regards to marketing budgets, her quote is that on any given Thursday, now we're talking pre and hopefully post-COVID when films were released, you're not only trying to penetrate the public's consciousness that your film is out there, you're trying to do it while about 5 or 6 or 7 other films are marketing to try and penetrate the public's consciousness that it's out there on that Thursday as well. So it's a really tough, it's a really expensive and tough exercise. And disappointingly, the Australian films really don't have that much money to throw at it. But then that also shouldn't be the reason why those films aren't, to use that term again, penetrating the public's consciousness, because we as locals should be wanting to go and see our own national cinemas. I mean, I know
agree,
that, when Parasite won the Best Film Academy Award, they interrupted the Korean national broadcasters interrupted whatever they were broadcasting at the time to publish or make public that information.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which was great, which goes to show their passion for their own national cinema. And what I guess for me is, like when I look back and I can mention an actor like Jeffrey Rush, who you'd hold in high esteem, but what disappoints me is that talking pre-noughties to even sort of your generation about films in the 90s like Shine that really started to pave a way for Australians, and also that let's say Oscar recognition of films does exist in this country, but a lot of people aren't aware of it.
Yeah, because I feel like a big thing with the Australian film industry, especially at the moment, is that there's a lot of big budget stuff coming to Australia to film and do their stuff over here. I know Queensland's a huge destination at the moment for a lot of the big budget stuff that's coming over from both Disney and Warner Brothers and stuff. Because I know that they filmed the Kong vs. Godzilla movie down on the Gold Coast, I believe.
That's Warner Brothers,
yeah. And then they're filming the new Thor movie, I think, down in Sydney, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously the film industry here in Australia, there's so much opportunities going on for these productions that are coming here to Australia. What's your comment on like the film industry at the moment, now that we're in this weird sort of COVID land at the moment, where here in Australia we've kind of dealt with the COVID situation relatively well, and we're now at a stage where we can kind of have these opportunities of productions and stuff come to Australia?
Oh, look, I think from an economic point of view, for the practitioners that had months without work, and particularly because they weren't even eligible for, or let's say, I won't be that broad, a number of them may not have been eligible for a lot of the government JobKeeper schemes and things like that. So for them now to be able to land into work and continuity of work, right through to Christmas and beyond is wonderful for that. I also think that in terms of upskilling the next generation coming through, i.e. the graduates from the film school, of which this morning I heard from a current undergraduate who's working on the Netflix project Spiderhead,
Cool.
was Chris Hemsworth, and she listed about 6 to 8 recent GFS alumni working on that. Now that's just Spiderhead. You've got on top of that, you've got the Young Rock series. You've got the Elvis film currently in production. You've then got the follow-on to Tiger Kings. You've got Dive Club shooting up in far north Queensland as well. Then you have some independent cinema kicking around. Like there was an indie Australian horror film that was recently made on the Gold Coast. So what I'm saying is that while things are good like that, there's opportunity that presents itself for those sort of moving on beyond film school and being able to step into a role, prove themselves, and then build up that CV of work. And then hopefully that continuity through the connections they've made as well. So what you've got to do is you've got to separate the foreign productions coming to the country from the local production as well. So in that respect, what's great is that there's enough there's enough production to go around for everybody. So there's not people scrambling for only a small number of productions, and that's then coming at the expense of those that are new and emerging. But at the same time, what I'd hate to see is for so much international stuff to land that we would have then trouble facilitating our local production as well. But generally speaking, Queensland has been known historically as it has a certain percentage of local production happening, which is great. You need that. If anything, it would be great if we had more series work happening up in this state. So one of the things we haven't even touched on is shows like Harrow as well, which is now up to season 3.
Oh, yeah.
So again, that's about, or maybe in production or about to commence as well. So when you look at all of those numbers and the hundreds of crew that are required for that, it's a really boon to be in southeast Queensland at the moment. It'll be a question of how long does that stick around for, because every country around the world will always has an incentive scheme to lure work to their territory. Equally, America as well has statewide schemes. From my understanding, Atlanta is a big hub for production now because of the incentives and rebates they have. But yeah, like we also need to be mindful of facilitating that local production as well. And I say that not because I'm always just going to be, showing a preferential treatment to that or anything like that. It's more so as a recognition that is going to be the staple that this country needs. And what we would love is a couple of series to be being produced up here, a couple of local productions, and then, icing on the cake would be some international productions on top of that, which then just makes sure that there's that cycle of work that's always going to be turning over. But we'll have to watch the value of the dollar. It's sitting up around 75 cents right now, and so when it gets much higher, it's there's less incentive to come to this country. But COVID, as you identified, is a big part of it as well. And if any of us have heard the rant from Tom Cruise,
I did hear that. Yeah,
yesterday.
it's pretty crazy.
Well, it's a bit crazy, but at the same time, it's a guy that's really
He's so passionate about his work.
Yeah, passionate about it. And I won't take a stance on either. Look, there's certain ways you want to conduct yourself in a workplace, and for that, I may sort of say, was that the right way of going about it? But equally, when you're passionate about trying to breathe life into your into what has essentially been for 120 years the norm, and they're really facing some challenges at the moment, like AMC cinemas I think recently appealed to the American government for a $15 billion bailout, and so cinema is really on its knees at the moment. You touched on Godzilla versus Kong earlier on, and Warner Brothers has just released,
2021
made the press release that they're going to release all of their stuff day in day in the cinemas and on HBO Max at the same time. So it's a real interesting time to be taking a snapshot of this industry.
The future of the film industry is very, very on rocky terms at the moment because it's in such a state of flux. There's so much change going on because of all these COVID stuff that's going on, because the cinemas are in such a financial are in such financial turmoil. And I feel like that because streaming services are also such a huge presence at the moment, that a lot of these studios are also relying on making content specifically for the streaming services, and not so much relying on cinema, which used to be the traditional method of making your box office revenue. Whereas now I feel like streaming services are now kind of becoming the majority where they make their money. So, but just to backtrack on that thing you said about Tom Cruise, for those who don't know, Tom Cruise was, well, I don't know if it was leaked or whatever, but he was caught, basically just ranting to some of his crew members who broke some COVID protocols or something on the film set whilst they were filming Mission Impossible 7. And basically he was just getting angry and said that, basically we need to make sure that we're doing this correctly so that we can keep this production going so that no one loses their jobs and that type of stuff. So, it was definitely a very passionate and a very enthusiastic rant. But I feel like that's just Tom Cruise. I feel like he's so dedicated to his craft, and he knows and understands the importance of a production like Mission Impossible 7, and knows that without that production, that so many thousands of people are going to lose their jobs. So, when it comes to those COVID protocols, I think some of them are a bit silly. I say, the whole social distancing thing, there's some things that I don't think is the best, but, we've got to do what we've got to do in order to get these productions made, in order to make, not only provide jobs, but make some great content as well. So what's your opinion on the future of the film industry now that we are in such a uncharted territory with regards to streaming, cinema, all that?
I think it's too soon to tell, to be quite honest, Caleb. For what you just touched on there about the design behind studios for more of streaming services, I don't think that, you've got to understand that quite often the slate of films that a studio is projected 5 years in advance of where they currently are. So to say that they were tailoring things now, I think would probably be a little bit premature for the situation that we've found ourselves in. I'm sure they're reacting to it. We're seeing the downstream effects of, like I said, with the Warner Brothers announcement and the impacts that makes on anyone from the agents and what percentages they claim from the actors and what percentages the actors claim from the original, from the initial box office, and where does that box office exist now, and if the box office amount is diminished because the film is released in the same day on a streaming service, what part of that revenue cut do they receive of that, if any at all? So, as I said, the washout is quite significant, and to see where we end up will be, I think, only you probably need at least another 12 months before we can make a proper assessment on that, and you actually see which industries kind of fell off that fiscal cliff without being either supported by government or being able to tap into a post-COVID market. But more importantly, I think, just touching on what you were saying about Tom Cruise speaking to his crew, or however you want to describe it, the issue there is twofold. The first one is that everyone needs to recognise that films live and die via insurance. So that will be another one of the things with respect to emerging filmmakers and getting an understanding that if you don't have the insurances in place, the films don't happen. So therefore, what he doesn't want to happen is for whoever their guarantor is to say we have to shut this down because people aren't abiding by the practices. And again, just depending on whatever anyone's individual perception of those practices are, what they have to adhere to is what the insurer wants them to. Because if the insurer is the one at the end of the day that's going to be shelling out the cash if something does go wrong, then they're the guiding principle. What they have is in terms of their COVID practices and protocols are the guiding principle for everybody else. So you have to divorce individual perception from the underwriter's perception. And the second part of that is also, yes, these other markets are gaining a lot of traction, but as we all know and as we all love, certain films draw you to the big screen, to that darkened room, to have that social experience with an audience, and what I touched on earlier on about Pulp Fiction, where you're engaged, where the audience is part of the accent to your emotional response to the film as well. Yeah. So in that respect, a lot of the films that are tailored to that market are going to live and breathe by what happens over the next, say, 12 months. And so for that, it is going to be, it is going to be a really interesting time to see. I mean, I look at, let's just reflect on one other, I don't know why we're thematically now aligning ourselves with Tom Cruise, but, you know, I have seen the several trailers that have been released for the new Top Gun. And that is not a film to be watching, you know, in your living room.
I 100% agree.
So for that, you have to say that there needs to be, the industry needs to survive, because if the studios fall over, and, you know, a lot of them are in, you know, sort of delicate positions these days, and if they fall over, those sorts of films aren't going to get made anymore. And so you then have to say to yourself, well, do we want to see that disappear? And if we don't,
I hope not.
Yeah, so if we don't, what we need to do is we need to be really broad-minded about what we can support and when we can, and as for those that are listening that are emerging practitioners, is just adhere to the protocols for the sake of realising the production. Because otherwise, if you can't do that, you can't release the film. And if you can't release the film, you can't put bums on seats. And if you can't do that, then the cinemas are going to fall over. And when they fall over, the rest of the, you know, it's just a domino effect.
100%, yeah. I'll say it's definitely an interesting future, but I'll say let's change gears. It's been an interesting past. This last year at the Griffith Film School has been crazy. It's been a very rocky road, and it's been tough to get through a lot of our, like, overcome a lot of the challenges that we've faced. But we did it. I feel like for the most part, the third year grad slate did really well and accomplished a lot of what they set out to. So obviously the the Griffith Film School has a really great program and does a lot of great things. What about GFS as a film school here in Queensland makes it stand out as compared to other film schools here in Queensland and in Australia as well?
Okay, so one thing I will put a disclaimer on is I'll never make a comment on another institution and what their program offers, because the reality of it is that, and I've always said that, whether you come and, you know, meet me at a TS Expo or an open day, all I'll ever talk about is what we think, you know, we do well. And I think one of the reasons, well, to begin with, is we've got an amazing head of school who thinks really broadly internationally as well, and is really active in that area. And then he's drawn all of these people into the film school with respect to our either full-time or casual staff, who hopefully the students see value in what they have to offer, not on just the hands-on, let's just teach you skills-based teaching, but then also talking broadly about their experiences in industry, about the futures that they see for the industry, and that there's not a singularity of messaging either. So we all have different interests in filmmaking practice, and that they're not always necessarily in harmony, but that's not a bad thing either. So to have that, you know, to use that term, diversity of different sort of teaching staff that are all looking at the various aspects of the industry in its broadest context is probably one of the things that I hope would set the film school apart, because we've done a lot of thinking about what we want the film school to be. And we know that in a certain way, all of those, you know, traditional institutions around the world that have a much, you know, longer history than us, particularly in sort of long form storytelling, it's hard for us to sort of be competing in that territory. But what we try to do is create a point of difference through the variety of ways that we can tell stories, and that includes what we do, or Richard does, with Live Lab as well. So we are one of the only film schools in Australia, if not the only, with a commercial division as well. And so again, we know that is a big sector of the industry, and we want our students to be able to understand that, because, you know, as I mentioned to those that happened to be or wanted to participate in the online session about landing in the industry, you've got to think it in its most broadest context. So these days it can vary from anybody wanting to, you know, to do stuff via Instagram. They want to do it, could be online territory like you're playing in with podcasting. It can be the corporate and the advertising sector, and it can be in what I call the capital F, capital I film industry. So we want to make sure that you guys come out with a grounding in all of that, and then to slowly navigate your path. So some will end up in free enterprise, building their own businesses up, and it's been great to see the outcomes of that. Some will, like I said, before, land on the big Hollywood films and have those experiences. Others will end up in all the other variety of sectors, and also that online space of YouTube and everything else. So to answer your question, we hope that sort of diversity of profiling, and we hope that also equips the graduates that come through with a bunch of opportunities with respect to, say, let's call it the film industry as the singular river, but then there's a bunch of tributaries that sort of flow out from that.
Yeah, exactly.
And they can look at which ones are going to work for them, and if they can then land in the industry or not, we need to be practical as well and say, for some people, once they graduate from 3 years of film school, they might say, I don't want to pick up another lighting case. I don't want to wake up at 4 a.m. to go out on a film set. And that's perfectly fine as well.
I agree, yeah.
And then they just need to look at those areas of the industry that are still transferable and applicable for the skills that they've got. And then also going back to where I started as well, and even if none of that is for them anymore, they've had enough association around what it is to go and realise projects. So that project-based nature again is what can also give them great employable skills, where somebody can set them a task and they can breathe life into it, and they can germinate it, and the next thing you know, it's a finished project. So I guess what I'm saying is that what we like to see is our students getting out there and amongst it in the broadest sense possible.
And I guess if we cast our eyes back to the beginning of the year, so just for context, for those who may not be aware, I'll say the Griffith Film School Bachelor of Film and Screen Media Production is a 3-year course. And in the third year of your course, the big staple is the big project that you get to make, about a 15-minute short film, or sometimes people make a doco or whatever. But yeah, the main staple is obviously the short films that everyone likes to gravitate towards and work on. Obviously, the big thing before COVID that we did was the big pitch day, where everyone comes and presents their scripts and their ideas and pitches that to, basically we sit in this massive studio, and we bring in 150 odd people, I would say, into the soundstage, would say.
Yeah, about 130 if the whole cohort turns up.
Yeah, so you get this massive room, and basically, everyone pitches their idea, and then from there we kind of select the best of the pile, and then we go off and make our slate. What's the thing about a pitch day that you look forward to the most?
Oh, the unexpected. I've seen so many different things happen on that day. What was it? Just a couple of years ago, I won't name them, but they turned up with camper chairs and they bunkered down at the front, ready to get comfortable, because it is a long time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We've had students turn up with miniature toy pianos and sing their pitch. We had a student who I think, just by his natural height, was about 6'4", 6'5", then stand on about a stack of 5 or 6 chairs just to try and... We've had students, want to play music to accompany their pitch, and they've actually drowned out their pitch, and we haven't heard a word said, unfortunately, because of the accompanying music. It's the unexpected that we really enjoy about it. It's the enthusiasm. It's the passion. And for us, it's one of the hardest things, or one of the hardest junctures in the year, because as I do say to the students, and I do mean it sincerely, that we would love to see every film realised, but the reality of it is, just due to numbers, time, and everything else, that's an impossibility. But I would say that, for any of those who are students listening, we don't necessarily want them to be 15-minute films either. So this year, for instance, we did those 2 TVCs. We only did the 1 documentary. We are open to all varieties of storytelling, but at the same time, the one thing I would be saying is that length doesn't determine the quality of the project. So I don't care if someone rocks up with a really good 3-minute idea, and potentially we can look at entertaining 2 or 3 of those compared to 1 15-minute. That's really what the challenges we face is the durations of the stories that are being put forward, the number of the cohort, what can be facilitated, and when all of those things sort of line up, that sort of determines what we can produce. So It's a great day. As both of you experienced, it can be daunting. You can be tiring by the end of it. So as I say to them, there's a pro and con for going first and going last. Yeah, but for me, it's always the unexpected. That I remember also another student one day just got up and said, "I want to make a nightmare," and I thought, "Oh, what a great way to open up your opening line for your pitch." So I learn a lot. Like that'd be the other thing too, is that the one thing that those who for those who teach at the film school are always constantly on our feet, because we're learning from you guys, and yeah, on any given year for what's being pitched, we're learning too.
Well, that's great, yeah, when you have that sort of back and forth of learning and understanding, because obviously we come here to learn so much about filmmaking, and you guys give us that opportunity and stuff like that of pitching in front of 100 odd people. It's as you say, it's daunting, but it's certainly something that definitely allows you to express your idea in a way that is not normal. And if you can express your idea in front of a group of people that are listening and excited to hear what you have to say, then yeah, that's definitely a good learning opportunity, I feel, for people who even that may not have that sort of inclination and or may have the apprehension of speaking in front of people and stuff like that. Because yeah, public speaking is a big fear for a lot of people, which isn't surprising. But obviously from then we then go through and pick the best, I think 10 or 11 projects I think we pick.
I'd interrupt and say the most. I wouldn't say they're necessarily the best. Okay, there's a lot of great ideas, and there's a lot of things that have to factor into thinking about, what's
the most feasible as well. Yeah, because that's obviously a huge part, is making sure that it's not only achievable, but it can be done in the time frame and with a decent budget as well. Yeah.
Well, also what I often say is we do know, the one thing we do know is how long the students will have to shoot the films, which is on average about 6 days. And so, if a script comes in, it's what I call the rigors of production and story versus time. So if you've delivered an 18-page script that's essentially, I don't know, a high-end action sequence, and knowing what can be achieved on any given day, from when I taught you in directing fundamentals, we know that there are basics on how to inform that approach. But it's then a question of your screen time versus your script duration versus the actual time, in 24 hours a day, also adhering to workplace health and safety conditions, to be able to realize the film in a way that does justice to the story. Now, if you have competing interests, we have to be conscious of that, because we have enough experience to know that it's probably not the forum for that film to be made, and it might be better off, as a postgraduate exercise or something else. So yeah, it isn't us just going, these are the best ideas and let's go. It's also wearing the hat, because what we also need to be conscious of is that there are between 12 and 18 crew members involved in that film, both from a committing their time, committing some money towards it, and they've bought into an idea from that pitch, where they have a vision in their mind's eye that's probably been accented by their associations with the crew members that they'll be working with, for what that outcome will be. And we feel some responsibility to making sure for all of those crew members it's a fulfilling experience.
Yeah, also I agree with everything you said. Yeah. Another thing that I guess was interesting around this time frame was, this was obviously before COVID came along. Once COVID came into the news cycle and it started becoming more of a thing that people were taking seriously, what were your initial thoughts? Like, did you think this is like the end of the world sort of thing, or what were your initial thoughts when COVID hit the news cycle?
Well, I actually really have a distinct memory of the first, well, let's say, news broadcast that I had heard about it. And at that stage, it wasn't, it didn't have the profile that it has now. And I actually spoke to a friend of mine who had just had a newborn, and I said, I just saw this thing on the news about a potential virus. And again, the research didn't sort of indicate then about who potentially, could be, could suffer health issues, whatever you want to describe it. So I was just looking out for somebody who had a 9-month-old baby, and thinking, just keep that on your radar. As things started to blow up in the media, and we got a real understanding of the impact that this was having on a bunch of different territories around the world, I was wearing 2 caps then. So I was wearing my program director's cap, and also keeping in mind that we just rolled out a new program for the first time in 2020 at the film school. That the third year graduate slate, and also how we were going to facilitate teaching. So there are a bunch of different moving parts. With respect to, let's just talk about the third year production. Yeah, the one thing that I hope everyone's got the message from this year is we understand why students come to film school, and they come to learn their skills and then apply those by the time they get to their third year. So for me, I always want to deliver on the promise of the premise, to use a film term, and I knew that this was going to be difficult this year, and also you got to remember we're working within the framework of an institution that at the end of the year students want to finish so that they can be awarded the degree, receive the learning outcomes that would speak to them with respect to their growth and maturity through the program. And so I guess to begin with, when everything went into lockdown, I didn't there wasn't a master plan or anything like that. We really were just taking things on face value and what we were getting told.
I think it's safe to say we were figuring it out as we were going along, and not just the film school, but the whole world.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so but as we started to sort of work out ways to facilitate things, and we could see that, and so then we're taking information from those industry practitioners that landed back in early, and looking at the processes they put in place. We realised that it was possible. But I guess the one thing I would commend the class of 2020 on is actually really adhering to those protocols that were put in place, and they weren't dismissive of, once we leave campus, we'll just do whatever we want. The behind the scenes video that was produced for the end of year graduate screenings, as much as it pulls on the heartstrings, it's also a demonstration of the adherence that the cohort made to those protocols, and that allowed us to facilitate the production. And again, going back to it, the idea that insurance was the deal breaker, and so we could prove to the industry.
So with regards to the protocols and stuff like that, who is the one that comes up with that? Is that a Queensland government thing, or is that something the film school devised specifically?
Oh, it's a mix of everything. So Screen Queensland published, the Guilds of Australia came up. There was a big Zoom session with basically the national film industry looking at practices that they wanted to put forward. We were taking advice from COVID safety officers that had actually gone back into production, and we were trying to find the delicate balance. And it's a bit like what we do with safety, is we know that in a certain way a student production doesn't have all of the budgetary, just the budget full stop that they can throw at something to reach the ambition of, say, industry with respects to stunts and safety. But we'll try and find that middle ground that allows them to facilitate it and come home safe, but not hemorrhage themselves financially. And it was the same thing here as well, where we just turned around and went, okay, here's what industry's doing. Where's the middle ground for what our students can reasonably do, and at the same time not jeopardize their health, and at the same time, not jeopardize the health of the actors or the locations that they were visiting. And with all those combinations, we come up with a plan. I never imagined that I'd be passing a federal government infectious disease control induction this year, but here I did it.
I can imagine there's a bunch of different inductions and things you have to do and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, but once you've got all of that information at hand, you then look at what we've imparted onto you guys and say, okay, well, hand on heart, we think we've met best practice. Off you go. Please listen to what we've had to say, which you did, and we got the outcome we wanted.
What were some of the challenges that we faced in regards to getting us back into production mode and getting us ready for principal photography? What were the things that we had to overcome in order to get that authorized and ready to go?
Oh, look, there's we had to come up with an induction and a protocol that the university would look at and look at the advice we had taken for it.
Is the university like an upper level above the film school, or?
Well, at the end of the day, the film school is a school within the greater university, and there's a hierarchical structure to that, and again with different insurances in place to make sure that you guys as students are never put in harm's way, and so for that, we do have to make sure that And again, because of the variety, whether it be medicine, whether it be engineering, whether it be criminology, whether it be law, each one's different. And so when they look at what the film school does, quite often the response is, you do what? Like, you send students. I didn't even know a border existed between South Australia and Queensland until a group of film school students went out to shoot there in Thargomindah.
Wow.
We've had students go to the French Pyrenees, New Zealand, you name it, and that's not a normal practice for a lot of the other different programs. So first of all, we need to show to them that we understand what we're doing, and that we've taken advice from industry, and that we believe that we're meeting best practice, and for them to sort of at least not necessarily completely get it, but at the same time sort of respect that the people that have put that in place know what they're doing and be able to sign off on it and move forward from there.
Yeah, so just so I can get like a visual idea of like the hierarchy. So there's a Griffith University upper body level, and then there's the film school, and then is there like you underneath, or like?
Well, no. So there's Griffith University.
Because I can imagine like there'd be so many like sort of steps that you have to go through in various stages in order to get like permission and sort of thing from various different people. Like I can imagine it's like a kind of too many cooks in the kitchen sort of thing.
No, look, all I'd say is it just has to happen at what we refer to as a group level.
Okay.
So the group for us is arts, education and law. And therefore the heads of that, which are the deans, are the ones that look at what look at what we're presenting. They make an informed decision. They also make an assessment of us as the school and what we've done historically, and it's about trust and faith at the same time, Caleb. So, but that's about as high up as it needs to go. But in addition to that, then also, if you want to say what were the challenges with the film school, is that we're also taking advice from the university with respect to return to campus, with respect to face-to-face teaching. And as those who return to campus relatively early, you'll all remember how quiet the building was, how we were all
very quiet. Yeah,
yep,
it was almost a ghost town.
Yep, we're all on tenterhooks about sanitizing hands and about maintaining social distances or distancing, and who's wearing masks and how many people are in a room, and would it be taught online or would it not be? So all of that advice comes from a central point. All of the more nuanced, let's call it practice-based stuff, is really coming from the individual school.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's an important thing that we have to state, is that there's so many moving parts, especially in an organization like this. In order to get everything ready to go and then making sure it's moving efficiently, there needs to be certain things that are put in place in order to make sure that everyone's not only doing it safely, but making sure we're also doing it the best way that we can. And I think that's important for people to understand, is that, there is so many different levels, and, a simple thing might not be easily accomplished. And like there was little things like, like for example, for casting, like that was something I was directly involved in. One of the big things that we had to get sorted for casting was obviously acquiring rooms and getting like a space that we could bring in actors to conduct auditions and stuff like that. And that just seems like such a simple task of, just pick a room and then we'll go from there. But something as simple as that needed to go through the rigorous, okay, can we get that building authorized? Can we get this room? What rooms can we have? How many people are in the building? That sort of thing. And I feel like, just even simple things like that in this sort of, pandemic world that we lived in, it was very important that we made sure that we followed the correct steps in order to do things that were safe for everyone.
Absolutely. And, in addition to that, there was also the challenge of bringing in people that weren't even students. So when you're casting, you're bringing in those, those actors where we don't have that background, where we can get them to go and, do the induction first and to sign off on everything. And so again, just from a nervous energy point of view, is we have to say what, we've got to look at the risk factors, and but as a credit to everybody, they conducted themselves.
I thought so. Yeah,
to
the
the
casting
highest
process went really smoothly.
And going back to what you were touching on, that just goes to show you the just everybody coming to terms with the challenges. So in other words, like you said, it was easy once to just send an email to our central admin and say, I want to book a room, and you'd book that room, and it was done and dusted. But this time, even if you sent that email and our central admin team were happy to book the room, that would then pop up on the timetabling system, and then timetabling would have stepped in and said, who's booking rooms? There's no teaching, back on campus yet. And then we then have to go and put forward our case as to why this needs to happen, and for them to align their thinking with, oh, okay, you're not doing this, you're doing that, and okay, blah, blah, blah. And then we end up with permission to go and do it. So yeah, it was quite complicated and tiresome.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm sure it was a similar sort of process with regards to actual production as well, like going out to dispatch and receiving the equipment and stuff like that so that we could go out onto location and then get the shots done and whatnot. Was it a similar sort of process with regards to getting permission for the equipment and stuff? Because I think we had to go through some sort of like cleaning process with the cameras and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, the turnaround of the gear, again, the size of the crew and the spaces you were occupying, and then working within the 1.5 meter social distancing boundaries. So therefore, that's when we introduced the face masks. So yeah, a whole number of moving parts to just sort of simply turn around and say, yes, we're contravening social distancing, but they're doing this. The sanitizing of the hands, you name it. So. To sum it up in one word, we just have to calibrate everybody's thinking towards what we're doing and how we're meeting best practice and then moving forward. And even just the idea of shooting a scene that involved intimacy as well.
Because obviously we're trying to maintain these like sort of social distancing practices, not only for the behind the scenes crew, but also the on-screen crew. I thought that was an interesting thing because that was one of the things that I kind of like puzzled me. Like for some of the films and stuff that had intimacy type scenes, it was like, well, how do we do this? And, the kind of logic behind it was sound and made sense, but like it was an inconvenience, especially if it was important to the story. So yeah, I think from a creative level, it definitely had to stimulate that sort of thought process of how can we fix this in a way that still works for the story, but is also COVID safe.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that we just, as time goes by, you take on board information and see what others are doing. And so, for instance, I guess the first thing I'd heard about intimate scenes was what they were doing in soap operas in the States, where they were using real partners and using makeup and wigs to make them look like the other actor, and then shooting it, in a way. I was looking at what they were doing on Neighbours, which were one of the first to return down in New South Wales. But then also what happened at the same time is that our ability to turn around testing was becoming more efficient. I then was taking advice on what they were doing down at Wentworth in Melbourne, where the writers were writing scenes for actors that were already in a pre-existing relationship with another cast member, so that they were already intimate in their private lives, so that they essentially, the differentiation between an intimate scene during production versus privately was one and the same. All these sorts of things informed the way that we'd go about it, and then also just the way that they could efficiently turn around the testing as well. So to begin with, when it first happened, I remember one of our staff. It took 4 days to get the results back from their initial test, and now you get tested in the morning, and probably by about 4 to 6 p.m. in the afternoon, you've got your results. So we could then turn around to a lot of the groups and say, well, and also the number of places that were facilitating testing, whether it be around the corner at the Mater Hospital or up at the PA, and we could say, well, if you go and get tested and you can come back with a negative result, then for all intents and purposes, we have what we hope is some genuine facts around your level of infection that you can proceed and do that scene in the interests of the film, which was where I began. As it's always in the interests of the film.
Was there ever a stage where you were given a certain set of protocols or rules with regards to COVID that you kind of got you frustrated and made you kind of get annoyed with the process and stuff like that?
No, how can I put it? It, like you said, it was all frontier territory for everybody. You just look at it and go, okay,
it is what it is, sort of thing.
Yeah, it is what it is, but it is what it is, and that'll probably change. Which, for example, the intimacy thing to begin with, it was like, no, it's not going to happen, rewrite it. And then by the time we actually got closer to production, as I just described,
and stuff was eased, yeah.
Yeah.
Moving into post-production, what were some of the things that you had to deal with regards to getting the editing suites and the cinema mixing and stuff? What were the things that had to get done in order to get that sort of process ready to go? Because obviously getting the cinema mix is a very important part of making a film. Obviously, that is done in the studio that we've got down there. So what was the process like getting that space ready for our sound designers and sound people to get ready?
It's actually pretty good this year because, you know, everyone else finished before us. So with the delays on production and also the delay with you guys, you know, I think most of the other courses finished about 5 weeks before the third year capstone film finished. And I, for one, was envious of that, I'll be honest with you, because I was really needing a break.
I'll say, yeah, because you've been super busy this whole year. Like, it's just been non-stop, consistent, just chaos.
100% the whole way. And I'm not saying 100%, I agree. That's the term I'll use in terms of the mental load for this year. So yeah, that actually afforded us the fact that a lot of the spaces weren't being used as heavily as they normally would be. So it wasn't probably a challenging prospect. It was more so just, you know, again, dealing with, how can I put this? Normally, a lot of the teaching team, especially the ones that are industry practitioners, they've got a cycle they go through, and then all of a sudden we had to push all of that back, and just making sure that that despite sort of a lot of them leaving, or when I say leaving, you know, that they were then going off to doing their other industry-based stuff, didn't mean that you guys then became like, you know, you didn't have clear direction. And so that was probably the biggest challenges to maintain. And also just the final submission items. Like normally, say for instance, in all the EPK materials and things like that, that would be something that would generally come through screen distribution. That course was run in an intensive at the start of the trimester. And so all of those deliverables couldn't happen because you hadn't shot yet. And so it was about then making sure that we could still take receipt of all of those assets that we need to promote and market and do all those things with your films, but without having an assessment item pegged to it. So that's probably, they were more of the challenges realistically.
What's the day-to-day look like for you? Obviously, as you would say, you were super busy throughout this whole year. What's some of the day-to-day responsibilities that you had to deal with throughout this whole COVID process?
No.
Was it just too broad to kind of pinpoint?
Yeah, there's too much. And look, but how can I say it? To use one of my colleagues' favourite terms, I'm not Robinson Crusoe on this. Every other staff member had the challenges. It's anything from general production issues right through to, you know, international students travelling back home. Several members of your cohort went back home, and then it's like, well, how do they still achieve their a fulfilling program outcome that they bought into when they first came to the film school, and recognizing that. So the scope is just broad, and I can never second guess what's going to land on my lap on any given day.
What is the one thing that has taught you most about the filmmaking industry and making movies this year? What's been the one thing that you've taken away from it?
The one thing?
If you could pinpoint it down to just one specific thing.
Okay, what's taught me? Never underestimate the determination of a film crew to go out and realise and achieve, you know, what they set out to. And I mean that. The single-mindedness, which is what I admire about film production and film production students, is their determination to realise whatever it is in their mind's eye. You know, when I say, you could say, oh, I've been taught, you know, the fundamentals of infectious disease control. Like, none of that's anything that I you know, how can I say, speaks to me.
Yeah.
This probably was the year that, for the most part, and even looking at some of the productions whereby, you know, I won't single anything out, but, you know, they had specific challenges with locations where they just couldn't get access because of these really cautious times that we were living in, but they still went, you know what, we're going to realise a film. A lot of other people would give up. Okay, so that determination of a filmmaker to say, no, come hell or high water, we're going to get there. That's
having tenacity is a huge part of being a filmmaker.
Yeah, it is. And so I wouldn't say I necessarily learnt that. I would say it was confirmed rather than, and for that, that's probably the most that says, yeah. that's what I love about film school students is that it can be challenging at times when we say no, you can't do that, but at the same time it goes to show their tenacity, to use your turn of phrase, to get there in the end.
After everything you've gone through this year, what would be one piece of advice you'd give to not only current filmmakers but future filmmakers going forward?
Oh, gee. Just keep producing original ideas. The idea, like to quote David Putnam, who delivers one of the courses for us, as he says, once the film industry used to be from the outside in. So in other words, the outside was a barrier that was determined by equipment. So, where you're shooting on film, budgets, things like that, and access to, say, high-end post and all those sorts of things. DaVinci Resolve, which you guys can download for free now, and with the absence of just the noise reduction plugin, you can access. It was once a $120,000 plus piece of software. All of that's accessible for you guys. So it's no longer from the outside in. You've got access to the gear. Now it's from the inside out. You can be a YouTuber, you can be an Instagrammer, you can go and shoot something on a low budget that looks like it's $1 million. So the way that the film production has changed, but to cut through, it's got to be an original idea where an audience, it speaks to the audience, they see something innovative in it, and they want to either pay the money or pay the subscription to engage with it. Because there's that much content out at the moment that if you're just going to watch something that you've seen already, it's, by the nature of it, a waste of time because it's done and dusted already.
That was a fantastic answer. I agree with everything you said, yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about was a personal project that you've been working on, Film School the Musical. This is something you've been working on for how long now? Oh,
look, it's been a pet project for a couple of years, and, excuse my language, for shits and giggles. They say write what you know, and so while I'm occupying the role that I do, and I think you would agree, you can never underestimate the original stories that student filmmakers make in the process of making films. So there was a moment, just a number of years ago where we went, I don't think I can write stories this good, like, some of the original ideas that were coming through. For lack of a better description, I remember sitting down with a student once who, had some reasonable physical bruising that I had immediately assumed was something to do with potentially a domestic violence or some form of like violent, sort of thing going on at the home. And I wanted to speak to them, and, and he turned around and said, okay, yeah, what's going on with my bruising? And I went, yeah, well, what are you okay? Is everything all right at home? And he was like, oh, yeah, I'm just cage fighting on weekends.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I was like...
That makes much more sense now.
Why you cage fighting? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, why are you doing that? And he goes, I raise money for my grad film.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and I was just like, this is just so far from the connections that I wanted. But what I'm saying there is that, in terms of the uniqueness of that sort of, situation, you just go, I don't know if I could come up with stories that good. And so the musical idea was just a whimsical thing.
What is it about? Like, what does it focus on, and what's kind of the general gist of it?
Well, the general gist of it is that, if it sees anything further than this proof of concept episode, it is a snapshot of a year that students go through in the production of their films. But the rich vein that we found with it is it's the idea of what we can play with the concept of the fourth wall. So when you're making a film, like I don't know, I love so to go back to what you said, what sort of films do you like? I like reading books about the making of films, and I love watching films about the making of films as well.
Yeah, I love that sort of behind the scenes documentary type stuff. I love that as well, yeah.
So, a recommendation hopefully for those, and even for yourselves, American Movie, which is a great doco about the making of Coven, this low-budget independent black and white film. The Player. There's a great film with Bruce Willis in it that apparently is then mirrored on the life of Alec Baldwin with Robert De Niro. I've forgotten the title of that one. Day for Night, all of these sorts of films. You've got the Jaws poster up here. There's a great book called The Jaws Log, which was the making of that. And there's also a documentary you can find on YouTube.
Yes, on
these
YouTube,
days.
yeah.
The shark is still swimming. So all of these things speak to me of the films that I like to watch. So we thought we'd do that within the world of the film school universe. But what I think could potentially be the unique, sort of point to step off from with that is that, like I just said before, the idea of where that fourth wall boundary exists within that universe, because in the pilot episode, the students arrive at film school for orientation, and they step into the soundstage to look at a crew and watch a production, but they then become the production. And so
cool.
it's about inverting where that, and the characters then orate their own narrative, so it's very self-referential.
Is it like narration and stuff, or?
Yeah, like the opening lyric is, we are the story, no behind the scenes. The characters and journey are our hopes and dreams.
Okay.
And then they turn into the musical moment. And that happens between when action's called and when cut's called. And so the creative freedom you have within that is what I think is probably the original part of the idea. And then it's just a question now of whether or not other people see any merit in that.
What was it that drew you about to it being a musical specifically? Like, you could have gone down like making just a traditional behind the scenes movie. What was about the musical and the songs and stuff that kind of was like, that's what I want to go with?
Again, that was probably just a whimsical idea, and I'll attribute it to a student who recently this year actually won a Australian Writers Guild Award. I remember in second year coming up to him and saying, "Oh, you're going to pitch something for third year," and he was like, "Oh, I don't know, yeah, maybe film school the musical," and we all got a laugh out of it and everything else. And then as we were going through the years of, as I said, experiencing these unique stories, we'd often sort of, when I say we, some of the teaching team go, "Oh, that's another one for film school the musical," just as a snap to sort of
okay, so it's like a kind of in joke amongst the faculty.
Yeah,
okay.
And when I say that, it's not in any way, shape, or form meant to make a mockery of what we do and the institution in and of itself.
I think it's a fun, cool idea, yeah.
Yeah, so, but then eventually I remember pitching it to, a few close industry friends of mine, and one of them's a very talented songwriter and composer, and we thought, we'd like to play in that arena. And one of the things I think is probably, there's two moments in it. First of all, I didn't want it to be a step kick, step tap type musical, so, So that would, for me, fall into the realm of, say, something like a La La Land, which is for some audiences is a great film, but it wasn't sort of a musical idea that I was really particularly fond of. But I remember sitting in the cinema and watching Rocket Man, and
yes, that was a great movie.
So when I saw that, and the creative freedoms that they were playing with the musical moments, again, is where I went, this is what we could be having some fun with as well.
Okay, yeah, I can visualize that now. That's really cool.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if it manages to go any further, is we imagine that every episode will have a different musical style. So we don't want it to be, again, just that sort of, okay, let's play in, I don't know, whether it be a pop forum or whether it be a sort of 50s, a la Grease or something like that. We, every episode we'll drift from, like the first episode, I kind of pegged as being kind of Europop as where we were grounded in. Initially, it was kind of in the realm of churches. We ended up probably more in towards Savage Garden. But the music hook is good, and but it wouldn't be the same for the next episode. We'd move into like a
tonal shift sort of thing.
Oh, genre shift. If we get to do the origin episode for one of the characters, it'll be a soft power ballad. We'll just shift from and hopefully the musical style is also an accent to whatever it is we're playing with the because again, just going to it, you could potentially from an education point of view, and not intentionally or deliberately, but we would love the idea of doing an episode that's a lot of it's cinematography orientated and focused, but by the end of it, you could go back and look at it and go, actually, every different lighting style and every different sort of, major pillar of the foundations of cinematography is visibly evident in that episode, but it just wasn't overt. Or we'll do an episode on editing being the retelling of the story in the cut, and you would go back and look at that episode again and go, oh, actually, I reckon that was told in the cut, like not in, not in the script.
It's kind of meta in a way, sort of thing.
It's very meta, and if I want to go to the highest meta level, I would love the last episode to be very much like what you guys experience is the graduation screenings, and then I would love to go out and make all of the films that were the content for the graduation screenings episode, and put them on the film festival circuit. And then if one of them got into a film festival, I would then send the character from the series to represent the film because it will be directed by that character.
Wow.
And you could then look at it and go, I can see that character making that film, but they're not a real person. They're a character created within a series that's gone and made a film, and then you've put it in the real world.
I can imagine an audience really getting wrapped up in that and having
it
a
hurts
lot
your
of fun
brain.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So what's the plan with it then? So is it obviously it's a proof of concept project.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is just trying to get it working and then see who can kind of get it up and running. Because is it a long form or is it short form episodes?
Oh no, we'd be short form. So look, and the other thing is duration is there's no longer durations. Like again, when things were wedded to broadcast half hours or TV hours or 90-minute features or what have you, we know now with the SVOD services that they're flexible and open to anything. We want it to be as long as it should be to maintain the audience's interests. We do think we know our audience, which is students that are either wanting to study at film school or have been at film school and can reflect back on it and sort of fondly, sort of identify.
Have a bit of nostalgia. Sort of thing,
identify with that. And like any project these days, we've just got to put it out to the universe and hopefully, it's no different to any filmmaker. Look, you either sell it at the script stage or create the proof of concept. We've decided for the proof of concept because we were afforded an opportunity at the start of the year that allowed us to go and do that. We do hope that the ideas in and of themselves stand up. Just like whether it be J.K. Rowling out there shopping a manuscript called Harry Potter and being rejected 20 times and then finding one publisher, we're in the same catchment as everybody else.
So that's the funny thing is that you can have a great idea and someone may not pick up on that idea straight away, but if you find the right person or the right outlet, it can just spark and then turn into something massive. So yeah, I wish you the best of luck with it. Honestly, it sounds like a really cool and groovy concept.
Thanks.
And I definitely tune in for it. But is there anything you wanted to promote or anything besides Film School the Musical? Like, is there anything else that you wanted to get out there, like social medias or anything like that?
No. Well, we've, I'm in that catchment that doesn't engage a lot in social media, but I'm kind of having to at the moment. So I feel
like it's becoming more and more of a social necessity for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, it is. The musical has its own Insta now, so you can go and you can follow it on that if you want.
What's the app?
Film School the Musical.
Film School the Musical. There you go.
The more support we can get around it, hopefully, the greater interest people can show in it too. But anyway, we'll see. As I said, the universe will decide, and we'll do our best to profile it in front of the right people, and it'll all be a question of timing. That's just the reality.
Timing's such a huge part. It's all about being in the right place at the right time with the right people. Yep. And that's when magic has happened.
Exactly.
Magic happens. Last question before we wrap up today. If there's one thing about the film industry that you could change, what would it be? That's a tough one.
What would you change about the film industry? I don't know if I have a ready-made. Well, not even ready-made. I don't know if I can. It's such a broad question though, Caleb. So
I'll answer my own question then, I guess. The one thing that, if I could change one thing about the film industry, is the reliance on reaching a deadline and a release date. I feel like so many times a movie gets released and not finished. There's so many times where we have a deadline that we have to meet, and if we don't reach the deadline, then the artistic vision is compromised. And I feel like if we had a bit more flexibility with regards to reaching a deadline and being able to reach a artistic vision and accomplish what the filmmakers are after, then that'd be the one thing, I'd hope we could change.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I'm going to address that question, or not the question, your statement there. The hard thing there, and this is what I'd say, just even reflecting on the third years with us, if you don't have an assessment deadline or you don't have a fixed shoot window, people, you know what I mean? Like, it just becomes fluid and nothing ever gets done. So the more that you, and so with respect to the film industry, I get that, you battle the rigors of what an artistic vision is, but at the same time, you've got to understand that if you're a studio and you're about to go and bankroll a project for, whether you're, Screen Australia throwing 5 million or let's say Warner Brothers throwing 60 million, or Revolution, or whomever it is, all the different partners that have bought into the project to finance it, at a certain point in time, they need to start to see a return on their investment, because there's huge stakes.
Of course, yeah.
So in that instance, and also what they've got to do is they've got to quarantine a release window. So they've got to look at everything else that's being released and sort of plan, let's say, in 2024 Christmas, this is a film that's going to land, and this is Universal's, foray into a Christmas tentpole or a July or a July release window as well. That's your finish line that you run towards, because if you don't land in that release window, then and there's the other adage in the film industry: if you can't be best, be first. If you can't be best, be first. Full stop. Sorry, that was what I was about to say.
Yeah.
And we also, you're also probably familiar with the notion of twin films. Okay, and there's a lot of instances where very similar films get released at similar times. So if I go back to that adage of if you can't be best, be first, there are people that will often go, we know another studio is producing something similar to us, we're going to get it out first. Now, whether we're best, who knows? The market will decide that. But if we don't, and we're second, and the other one was best, then we may really blow our money on this. So there's a lot of competing interests that make those deadlines really, really precious. I would say, actually, now that I've had a quick chance to ruminate on it, my main comment would go back to where we started, and that would be for people to lower their skepticism of Aussie films, at least jump in and watch one, pay the money for it, or watch a couple and drill down on it, because it's your own backyard. And for us to have this, great international industry coming here to facilitate production, we also need our own industry as one of the first stepping stones for a lot of our creative heads of department. So, for those that harbour those ambitions, that want to go, potentially on a greater international playing field, great, but you're going to still have to start by doing something locally. And so at a certain point in time, what we don't want is the Australian government to sort of be looking at what, the money that they're putting towards the industry and going, do you know what? We're better off putting that in some other department. The industry struggles enough as it is, so we need at least some form of momentum to keep supporting it, so that it can be ongoing, so it can facilitate those larger ambitions of certain practitioners.
Dean, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming in. I know you're a very busy man with lots going on in life. So I thank you for taking the time out of your day to come sit down with me and have this conversation. I really appreciate it. And I feel it's been insightful. I've definitely learned a lot from this conversation. And I feel like, those who are listening may have also learned some things about the process of not only that went down at film school, but also a bit of insight into your own creator side with Film School the Musical, I think. So it's a very cool project. And like I said, I wish you the best with it. But yeah, that concludes the very first episode of Caleb's Conversation podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening on an audio form, make sure you are following the podcast as well. Thank you very much for watching or listening wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in another time.